So hello, good afternoon everyone. I'm Dave M. Pag Ong, and I am one of the reporters for today. And we are tasked to report about the extract of the new civil code. So first, the extract for the pledge article 264, the concept and grounds for arising of pledge. So number one, we have the transfer by one person to another of property or rights thereto as security for an obligation shall be considered to be a pledge. So sometimes pledges are form of security to assure that a person will repay a debt or perform an act under contract. So in a pledge, one person temporarily gives possession of property to another party or to another person. So pledges are typically used in securing, just like loans or pawning property for cash or guaranteeing contracted work will be done. Then we have number two. By virtue of pledge, the creditor, with regard to an obligation secured by a pledge, shall be have the right, in the event of non-performance by the debtor of this obligation, to receive satisfaction from the value of the pledge property, preferentially before an other creditor of the person to whom this property belongs, with the exception established by a law. So pledges are different from sales. In a sale, both possession and ownership of property are permanently transferred to the buyer. However, in a pledge, only possession passes to a second party. So the first party retains ownership of the property in question, while the second party takes possession of the property until the terms of the contract are satisfied. So sa pledge, for example, ako gi-pledge na ako ang property. Ako lang gyapon ang tag-iya, but katong kung asan ako gi-transfer ang property or asan ako gi-pledge, na siya right, or na siya right nga i-possess kato nga property kay tungod gi-pledge nako sa iyaha. But ang pledge mag-end siya in a terms depending sa inyong contract. So three, the pledge holder shall have the right to receive on the same principle satisfaction from insurance compensation for loss or damage of the pledged property, irrespective of to whose benefit it was insured, unless loss or damage occurred for reasons for which the pledge holder is liable. So in pledges, both parties have certain rights and liabilities. So the contract of the pledge represent only one set of these. So for example, the terms under which the debt or obligation will be fulfilled and the pledged property returned. So one on one, or on the other hand, the pledger rights extend to the safekeeping and protection of his property while it is in possession of the pledgee. So the property cannot be used without permission unless used in necessary for its preservation, such as exercising a live animal. So an unauthorized use of property is called conversion and may make the pledge liable for damages. Thus, the person who should not use the property of the other unless it is given by a permission. So number four, a pledge shall be arise by virtue of a contract or on the basis of the law or of a law. So in addition to number three, so the uh, the pledgee has the duty to care, or has more than the duty to care for the pledger's property. So the pledgee has the right to the possession and control of any income accruing during the period of the pledge unless an agreement to the contrary exists. So in this, Number four, a pledge shall arise by virtue of a contract or on the basis of law. So, since kung nasa lay contract, so ang pledge shall arise by virtue of a contract. So, dili siya pwede mahimo kung walay sabot kumbaga nga nahitabo. So, the next one is Article 265, types of pledges. So, first, so types of pledges or pledge. So it could be in the form of pawn or pagsangla, mortgage, and also a pledge of rights. So number two, a pledge under which the pledge property is transferred from the pledger to the jurisdiction of the pledge holder shall be deemed to be a pawn. So kung ang pledge there is under if a pledge under which the pledge property is transferred, kung na-transfer daw siya from the pledger to the jurisdiction of the pledge holder, so it could be considered or it shall be deemed to be a pawn. So marag gi sangla daw ni. The number three, a pledge, the subject of which is immovable property shall be deemed to a mortgage. So ang pledge daw kung subject which is immovable property, so shall be deemed to be a mortgage. So a mortgage, another term niya is kanang murag isang lang Japon nimo siya or kining ginatawag nga loan nga habang napa siya iyaha or habang naka-pledge pa is nagatubo ang interest or ginabot nga niya og interest. Then during the time nga murag kuha na nimo ang property or return na, bayaran nimo appeal ang interest. Then for the article 266 which is the pledger, so either the debtor himself or a third person may be a pledger. So sa pledger daw, pwede daw mahimong pledger ang debtor or ang third person katong mao ang pledger. So kaning debtor is man siya ang tao nga who owes some money or kanay utang, while ang pledger is medyo similar lang sila. Pledger is ang person nga nag-offer og pledge or ang debtor who gives a pledge on an asset to a creditor. So number two, the owner thereof may be the pledger of a thing. So ang owner daw itself sa property can be a pledger. So number three, the person to whom the pledge right belongs may be the pledger of a right. So the person daw nga the person to whom the pledge right belongs. Kung asa katong person daw nga naay right sa pledge or kung baga nabilong sa iya nabilong siya ang naay right sa katong nga pledge, may be the pledger of a right. So the pledge of the right to a thing shall not be permitted. So without the consent of the owner unless provided otherwise by a law or by the contract. So ang pledge daw of the right dili daw siya permitted. So without the consent of the owner. So dili nimo pwede hilabtan ang property unless it is given or it is stated in the contract or it is provided by the law. So for the Article 267, subject of pledge. So in this article, any property, including things and property rights or demands, may be the subject of a pledge except for the things withdrawn from turnover, demands inextricably connected with the person of the creditor. So in particular, demands concerning compensation for harm caused to life or health, alimony, and other demands whose assignment to another person has been prohibited by a law. So the pledge of individual types of property of citizens against which levy of execution is not permitted may be prohibited or limited by. So in Article 268, for the demands secured by pledge. So, it is stated here that unless provided otherwise by a contract, so a pledge shall secure a demand in that amount which it has at the moment of satisfaction. So, kung unless daw nga provided or otherwise nakastate sa contract, ang pledge daw is dapat mag-secure og demand sa exact amount or a particular amount of satisfaction sa moment or sa time nga na siya sa imo. So in particular, it is called or it we shall call it interest, penalty, or compensation of losses caused by delay of performance, and also compensation of necessary expenses of the pledge holder for the maintenance of the pledge thing and expenses relating to recovery. So for the Article 269, pledge with and without transfer of pledge property to pledge holder. So we will talk about this on this article. So number one, pledge property shall remain with the pledgor unless provided otherwise by the contract. So ang pledge property daw is still magpabilin sa pledgor unless, as always na ito ginaingon, provided sa, or stated sa contract nga pwede siya or mawala sa iya ang property. Number two, property on which a mortgage is established and also pledged goods in turnover shall not be transferred to the pledge holder. So ang property daw nga nakasangla and also pledged goods in turnover, dili daw siya pwede ma-transfer siya sa pledge holder. So ang owner mag-remain gyapon sa iyaha ang property maskin ang property kay naka on which a mortgage is established or nakasangla siya. Number 3, the subject of a pledge may be left with pledgor under lock and seal of the pledge holder. So the subject of pledge kay magpabilin sa pledgor under locked and sealed of the next one. Number 4 is the subject of a pledge may be left with the pledgor with the imposition of marks testifying to the pledge or firm pledge. Number 5, the subject of a pledge transferred by the pledgor for a time in possession or used to a third person shall be considered to be leaving it with the pledgor. So ang subject of if the subject of a pledge daw kay transferred by the pledgor sa time in possession or nagamit to a third person, makonsider daw ni siya to be a living, makonsider daw siya nga ipabilin sa pledgor. Number 6, in the event of the pledge of a property right certified by a security, it shall be transferred to a pledge holder or on deposit to a notary unless provided otherwise by the contract. So, again, ang pledge of the property must be certified by a security or it must be secured and it shall be transferred to the pledge holder or on a deposit to notary unless provided otherwise by a contract. So, kung wala man lang nakastate sa inyong contract or sa inyong terms and condition based sa inyong nasabutan, so dili siya pwede. So, Article 270, Origin of Right and Pledge. So, in this article, we'll talk about the origin of right and pledge. Number 1, the right of pledge shall arise from the moment of conclusion of the contract on pledge, or if the contract is subject to notarial certification, from the moment of notarial certification, and in the event of obligatory registration of the contract from the moment of the registration thereof. So number 2, if the subject of pledge is accordance with a law or contract must be situated with the pledge holder. So the right of the pledge shall arise at the moment of the transfer to him of the subject of the pledge. So ang right daw sa pledge shall arise at the moment nga gitransfer na sa iyaha ang subject of pledge. And if such transfer was effectuated before the conclusion of the contract, from the moment of its Article 271, Contract on Pledge, its form and registration. So in the contract on pledge must be specified by the subject of pledge and its valuation, the essence, amount, and period for performance of the obligations secured by the pledge. So it also must contain an indication of with which of the parties the pledge property is situated. So number two, a contract on pledge must be concluded in written form. So ang mga contract or ang mga conditions, terms and conditions na inyo nasabutan must be concluded in a written form. Dapat in a formal letter or in a written form siya. Di siya pwede karang istorya-istorya lang kay wala tay evidence or wala tay ginapanghawakan nga ano. Number three, a contract on mortgage and also contract on the pledge of movable property or rights to properties to secure obligation under a contract, which must be notarially certified, shall be subject to notarial certification. So, katong mga gisangla daw and also contract of the pledge movable property or rights to property, dapat mag-secure og obligations or karon na kailangan og notarial certification, dapat ipa-certified. Number four, a contract on a mortgage must be registered in the procedure established for the registration of transaction with respective property. Number five, the failure to comply with the rules contained in paragraphs 2, 3, and 4 of the present article shall entail the invalidity of the contract on pledge. So kapag dili na nato mabuhat ang terms and conditions or ang dili nato ma-comply ang mga rules na nasulat sa kining article is mag-lead na siya into invalidity sa contract. So that ends my report, and to continue our report, please watch the video of my group mates. So thank you everyone, keep safe and stay